Russia regains the initiative. Western tanks, Russian invasion documentary by Kings and General. Let's go. Sort this throw out. How we all been, guys? Gonna try and do a nice binge of this.
Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine continues.
Really was
In the
unprovoked.
second half of 2022, Ukraine regained the strategic initiative on the battlefield, liberating the Kharkiv Oblast and...
Obviously, I'm still so far behind now, but as of recording this, obviously it's halfway through the month of November. So obviously we have the Israel-Palestinian Hamas situation happening. Do you think that that's taken the scope and the eye off of this confrontation? Because I do believe so as well.
The right bank
do you
of the
think
Dnipro.
Russia is now going to start
Still, the narrowing of the front
atrocities?
line and mobilization have allowed Russia to stabilize the situation on the ground and regain initiative to a certain extent. Russia has been attacking on the Donbass front for months and has achieved some success, despite a grinding pace and heavy losses. Meanwhile, Ukraine hopes that increased hardware support from the West will allow it to recapture momentum and start the much-expected counter-offensive.
If
We're
it
going
goes
to talk
well,
about this and other updates
it'll
from
go
the
on
second half
Patreon before
of January.
YouTube. And that link for our Patreon
Before
will be in the
discussing
description
the
box
most
down
active
below,
front in
guys.
Donbass, let's look at the situation elsewhere on the battlefield.
Okay.
The status quo
So we're not
persisted
gonna go
on
on
the
Donbass
Kherson
straight
front
away.
along the Dnipro. In this period, we have not seen any information on engagement in areas like the Kinburn Spit or on Potomkinsky Island, where, according to the Ukrainian command, battles took place earlier. The only confirmed engagement in this period between Ukraine and Russia occurred on January 25th, when a small Ukrainian unit landed near Kosunka.
So this is January 2023, right?
Ukrainian military intelligence claimed this was a successful raid
Like the 15th
in which
or
several
30th,
Russian soldiers
2023.
were killed and an armored vehicle destroyed.
Okay.
In contrast, Russian sources stated that the Ukrainian unit was eliminated. We can assume that these attacks aimed to fix Russian forces along the left bank of the Dnipro, preventing them from being deployed elsewhere.
Okay.
There were no other notable developments on this front. Most of the actions on the North Luhansk front took place in the Kreminna section. As of late January, the situation is still covered with the fog of war, as the sides are reportedly fighting for control of the forest area near Kreminna.
So we don't know what's going
There
on
are
because it's
reports
so
that Russia is
heavily
deploying more forces to
foresty.
this section, the size of which may indicate that they plan to launch an attack from there. The Institute
it
for
just
the
'cause they
Study
won't be
of
able to
War
tell what's going on there?
assesses that Luhansk Oblast is the most likely axis of a major Russian
Okay.
offensive, which Bloomberg
We'll see how that
reported
plays out
based on
later on
information
throughout
allegedly
the series.
provided by anonymous Russian sources. Elsewhere on the North Luhansk front, heavy battles continued in and around Novoselivska, Chornopopivka and Sperna, without significant changes on the battlefield. After
It's
months
such
of
a
lull,
long
there has been
front.
some notable action on the Zaporizhia front, and despite expectations, it was the Russian army which conducted offensive operations in several sections. It is reported that Russia has been attacking with small assault groups of 10 to 15 people without much artillery or armored support.
So like spec
On
op
January
units,
20th,
but not
the
trained.
123rd Motorized Regiment of DPR separatists attacked towards the town of Orikhiv and reportedly captured the town of Mali Shebaki in
Nice.
the no man's land. Other sources claim that the Ukrainian army later reclaimed the lost territory. A few days later,
What do we
the
know
Russian 40th
for
and
sure?
155th Naval Infantry Brigades and elements of the Russian Special Forces launched an attack on Volodar at the junction of the Zaporizhia and
Yep.
Donbass fronts. The 72nd Mechanized Brigade, which defended the capital Kyiv at the beginning of the war, inflicted heavy losses on Russian attackers, who reportedly managed to make minimal gains to the southeast of Volodar. At this point, it looks like the attack on the Orikhiv section was more of a probing attack to find weaknesses in Ukrainian defenses, while the Volodar attack may be a Russian attempt at something bigger.
Interesting.
The
What are your
Donbass
thoughts?
front
Let me know in the
continues to
comments
be
box
the
down below.
hottest area
Because
of
I'm
the war.
interested. Do you think it was a probing
Russia
attack?
suffered significant losses, but achieved further gains towards Bakhmut.
So were those
Klishchiivka
losses
to the
worth it?
southwest
Probably
and
not.
Blahodastna to the northeast of Bakhmut were the main targets of Russian attacks on the
Okay.
Donbass front in this period. On January 17th,
Did they
Wagner groups
get
entered
many
the
gains?
outskirts of Klishchiivka and completed the capture of this town within a week.
Oh, we haven't even got up to the leader of the Wagner Group's mutiny yet in this series. I'm really behind.
This has allowed them to
need
develop
to
their
binge.
success towards Ivanivska. The fall of Ivanivska would cut one of the last remaining supply lines on the T-0504 highway to Bakhmut.
I see why the Russians
logical
wanted to get
target
to
for
that.
Russia on this axis
Yep.
would be Chasiv Yar on the 00506 highway. If Russia achieved this goal, all supply lines to Bakhmut from the west would be cut, forcing the Ukrainian army to retreat from Bakhmut, as their supply line from the north, the T-0513 highway, is also under a grave threat at this point. Wagner units completed the capture of Blahodatna on this highway on January 29th.
Okay.
As of late January, the 110th Territorial Defense Brigade has been repelling Wagner attacks on Krasnohora on the MO3 and MO513 highway junction, vitally important for Ukrainian control over Bakhmut. Russia also
That was on the
occupied
29th,
Krasnopolivka
right?
and succeeded in taking the fighting into the suburbs of Bakhmut once again. What would the possible fall of Bakhmut mean for the war in Ukraine? It would not be a strategic disaster for the defenders, but it would cause a vital road junction to be captured by Russia.
It would change
and would
the
enable a Russian
fronts,
push north
the line of
towards
the fronts
Sloviansk, Kramatorsk
massively,
and
right?
Seversk, along with putting pressure on the Ukrainian units on the North Luhansk front from the south. It would also boost morale for Russia, as their first significant victory since the capture of Lysychansk back in July. It is reported that Ukraine's allies have been recommending that they withdraw from Bakhmut to preserve Ukrainian forces, which can be used elsewhere. But while that may be a sound recommendation, it is unlikely that Russia will stop in Bakhmut, as they will look to develop their success towards the north. Deterioration of the situation in this area has prompted Ukraine's allies to make quicker decisions on sending more weapons to Ukraine. Most importantly, after weeks of negotiations and stalling, Western countries have finally agreed to deliver tanks to Ukraine. Initially, the United States was reluctant to supply Abrams tanks, since they believed that learning to operate them would take a lot of time, while their maintenance would be another issue. Thus, it was widely considered that German-made Leopard tanks would be the best option for Ukraine, as many European countries already have them, and their maintenance would not constitute a problem. However, despite calls from the United States, Britain, Poland, and several other European countries, Germany was reluctant to be the first to pledge tanks to Ukraine, fearing retaliation from Russia, while also implicitly conveying a message that it would be ready to take this step if the United States does it first. Moreover, Germany did not allow other countries with Leopard tanks to supply them to Ukraine. Even at the January 20th...
I didn't know that. They were really worried about the economy of Germany and what limitations Russia was going to put on their society. Do you know what I mean? So that power really did hold weight in that situation. I didn't realize that they stopped other countries from supplying Ukraine with the Leopard tanks as well.
Meeting of Ukraine's allies in Ramstein, where they discussed further military assistance to Kyiv. An agreement on Leopards was not reached. But the ice finally broke on January 25th, when the German Chancellor Scholz
at Watches of Switzerland.
Gotta give those YouTubers money.
Timepiece from our unrivaled selection of the world's most
agreed to supply 14 Leopard 2A6 tanks to Ukraine, after a signal of intentions from the United States to send Abrams tanks too. Leopard 2A6 is the penultimate version of this main battle tank. Germany also allowed other countries to send Leopards to Ukraine.
So they changed it.
This had the effect
by
of
the
floodgates
25th.
being opened.
Yeah.
Portugal pledged to send 4 Leopard 2A6s to Ukraine. Spain's defense minister confirmed plans to send Leopard 2s to Ukraine. Canada pledged 4 Leopard A4s, while Norway, the Netherlands, and Poland, also directly or indirectly through media, informed about their intentions to send Leopards to Ukraine.
Nice.
According to Zelensky, by late January, 12 countries pledged to send tanks to Ukraine. Reports indicate that Ukraine will receive almost 100 Leopard 2s of different modifications. But other tanks have been pledged to Ukraine as well. According to the Algerian portal Men in
Leopards
Defense,
are quite good,
Morocco
aren't they?
has sent nearly 20 T-72B tanks to Ukraine. Morocco then officially refuted this claim and stated that these tanks were sent to Czechia for modernization, which sent them to Kyiv without Morocco's permission. On January 20th.
Now, is that Morocco trying to play neutral and find a loophole and not get blame from Russia, or is that what actually happened? 'Cause that's interesting.
French President Macron pledged to send Leclerc tanks to Ukraine. On January 25th, the United States agreed to send 31 Abrams tanks with 8 M88 recovery vehicles, which should help with the maintenance of Abrams tanks. 2 days later, Poland pledged 30 modernized PT-91 tanks.
But didn't they have some of those?
According to the Ukrainian ambassador to France, Ukraine will receive 321 main battle tanks from its allies. The West has also made other pledges of support to Ukraine. On January 17th, British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace informed that 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers would be trained in the UK in 2023. Along with that, the Netherlands announced its intention to send a Patriot missile defense system to Ukraine, while the EU sent its first package of financial assistance worth €3 billion to Ukraine. On January 18th, Canada gave...
So not only are the countries individually chucking money in there, because you've got support from America, you've got support from the UK, like financial support, not only armory support and equipment support, they've also financially supported these guys, and now you also have EU chucking that amount of money in there as well. It's crazy, the power of the EU, and it's understandable why Russia was so scared of it to start off with.
200 Rochelle Senator vehicles. The following day was particularly notable for all the pledges made to Ukraine. Estonia promised military aid worth over 1% of its GDP to Ukraine, including their 155mm howitzers, grenade launchers, and ammunition. Sweden pledged 50 CV-90 tracked infantry fighting vehicles and Archer artillery systems.
As well. The thing with it is they all know if they support here, then later on they'll be able to get supplies, maybe even upgraded supplies to replace those and replenish their systems because they have money as well.
An aid package worth $419 million. Denmark donated 19 Caesar self-propelled howitzers, which it bought from France. The US announced a military aid package worth $2.5 billion, which included 59 Bradley armored fighting vehicles, 8 Avenger air defense systems, 90 Stryker armored fighting vehicles, 53 MRAPs, 350 HMMWVs, HARM missiles, NASAMS missiles, artillery shells, Excalibur precision-guided projectiles,
Look at
landmines,
this.
HIMARS munitions, anti-tank rockets, night vision equipment, command vehicles, and so on. Later, they signaled their intention to increase the production of 155mm artillery shells to help alleviate Ukraine's artillery shell shortages. On January 30th, Australia and France...
Literally, it's a war of attrition, and the Ukraine just has the United States backing, and it's just an industry and an equipment hub. Do you know what I mean? Manufacturing, golden area. Do you know what I mean? Secluded, and it has a workforce that is able to produce these amazing equipments at such a fast rate. Yeah, it's just insane.
Also signed an agreement to produce 155mm artillery shells.
State, I guess.
On January 20th, Finland announced a military aid package worth €400 million, without specifying what it included. The German Defense Ministry announced €1 billion worth of military aid to Ukraine, which included Iveco VM90 and Iveco ACL90 military vehicles, and Renault TRM 2000 light utility trucks. On January 26th, a day after a Russian missile hit a Turkish merchant vessel in Kherson, Turkey pledged to deliver floating power plants to Ukraine, each capable of meeting the power needs of 1 million households.
Oh.
Also on this day, Norway
That's
stated
Turkey
that it
as
would
well.
train Ukrainian soldiers.
Turkey were quite neutral in the during the Black Sea part a few videos ago. I'm sure they were quite neutral. They were obviously swinging their dominance in the Black Sea, not allowing the Russian fleet to leave and EU to come back into the Black Sea. But I didn't know they were going to take such a strong stance on the Ukrainian side by helping them have power for the civilians.
On January 27th, Belgium promised €92 million worth of military aid, which included portable anti-aircraft systems, anti-tank guns, and vehicles. On January 28th, Italy and France agreed to deliver SAMP-T air defense systems with Asta missiles capable of shooting down ballistic missiles. Finally, on January 31st, Reuters reported about the intention of the United States to provide another military aid package to Ukraine worth $2.2 billion, which is expected to include precision ground-launched small-diameter bombs with a 150-kilometer range. That would be short of the Ukrainian wishes to get ATACMS with a 300-kilometer range, but it would still have massive implications on the battlefield. HIMARS have played an important role in weakening the Russian supply lines and military infrastructure in Ukraine, paving the way for the Ukrainian counter-offensive operations in the second half of 2022. Still, HIMARS only has an 80-kilometer range, allowing the Russians to be untouched by moving their assets deeper into occupied areas, while GLSDB would cover almost all occupied areas except for parts of Crimea. This would force the Russians to do a better job of hiding or removing their assets to Russia, creating significant logistical constraints for its occupation campaign in Ukraine. In the described period, Ukraine has received a massive boost from its allies,
guys. That's
particularly in connection
outrageous.
with promises of tank supplies. Ukraine will get these tanks sometime in the spring and summer of 2023, excluding Abrams tanks, the training for which may take more time. And since the West has already passed the threshold of supplying tanks to Ukraine, it is safe to assume that more will come. This armored support will allow Ukraine to regain the initiative on the battlefield and launch its expected counter-offensive. Now Ukraine has started sending signals to its allies asking for F-16 fighters, or potentially other Western-made fighters like French Rafale or Swedish Gripen. Statements from the West in that regard are confusing at the moment.
They're worried.
On
They
January
don't want
30th,
to just yet.
Polish Prime Minister Morawiecki stated that Poland
Like
would be
during that
ready to
period
give
of
any
time.
aircraft to Ukraine, but only in full coordination with its allies. At a press conference with Macron, Dutch Prime Minister Rutte expressed that there are no taboos concerning supplies they can make to Ukraine to win the war against Russia, while adding that sending warplanes would be a huge step. US President Biden publicly said no to requests for F-16s, but it would not be the first time that the West initially opposed.
Job done. Perfect. So we have a beautiful 30.
Delivery of certain types of equipment or
90%
vehicles
sure they
to
cave on that
before being
statement, don't they?
persuaded by Ukraine. Predictably, Russia was unhappy with delivering Western-produced tanks to Ukraine, but downplayed their importance. Putin's spokesperson, Peskov, stated that Abrams and Leopard tanks are quite a failure in terms of technological aspects, and that it is wrong to exaggerate their potential. They have said similar things
They're
about
just worried.
HIMARS and other Western weapons,
They're
which
worried.
have made a difference on the battlefield.
They need to
On
keep
the
their
contrary, there was no
population
information
under
about weapon
control.
supplies to Russia. Iran is still reluctant to give ballistic missiles to Russia and has been busy defending against drone attacks on its military infrastructure in late January. We will see if this attack impacted Iran's arms deals with Russia in the foreseeable future.
Okay.
It is indicative that Russia's pace of drone attacks and airstrikes on Ukraine has slowed down significantly in this period, as there was only one major attack of that kind.
I remember
On
seeing
January
this kicked up
26th,
again though.
Russia launched 55 cruise missiles, 47 of which were shot down, and 24 Shahed drones, all downed, according to Ukraine. It is possible to speculate that Russia would need more Iranian drones to continue its campaign targeting Ukrainian critical infrastructure. Belarus is still being discussed as a potential starting point for another attack on Kyiv. According to the Zakalo independent media outlet from Belarus, Russia has sent 14 T-72B3 tanks, 4 Uragan MLRS, 41 artillery units, dozens of infantry fighting vehicles, armored vehicles and engineering vehicles, 12 combat helicopters,
It's just
12
to keep that
aircraft,
threat there,
15
right?
Tor M2
Though, right?
anti-aircraft missile systems, and 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers since October.
Also,
Clearly,
he
these
needs to
numbers
keep
are
that front
insufficient
under
for any
control, because if he
significant
loses
offensive operation.
Belarus, that's a big knock to his
There have
power and
been
his
no
empire.
attempts to negotiate in this period, as both sides
Putin
are
needs to
bracing
keep this
for their
regime up.
expected offensives. On January 22nd, Peskov stated that there are no conditions for negotiations between Russia and Ukraine at the moment, neither de facto nor de jure. 3 days later, Zelensky expressed that he was not interested in negotiating with Putin, to which Peskov responded by saying that Zelensky had long lost an opportunity to be Putin's opponent. So it is
What?
clear that the
He's
sides
well
are
and
too far apart
truly
to
Putin's
negotiate,
opponent
which
at the
means
moment.
the war will continue. How will it play out in the foreseeable future? It is extremely difficult to predict anything in a war, but we can speculate based on the information we have. Kyiv has been vocal about its intention to liberate all its lands, including Crimea, in 2023. Training thousands of Ukrainian soldiers in Europe, a pledge of hundreds of tanks by the West, and General Zaluzhny's earlier note that Ukraine is organizing and
The fact
holding
he
its
wants
strike
Ukraine
force
as
in
well
reserve indicates
makes the
that
whole
Ukraine will attempt a
situation-
counter-offensive.
And I completely
In
get why he
previous
wants
videos, we
Ukraine,
assumed that the
but
Zaporizhian
it
and
does
North
make the whole
Luhansk fronts
situation
would be
even
where
more
the Ukrainian
intense.
army would launch its counter-offensive. On the Zaporizhian front, taking Melitopol, Tokmak and Berdyansk would be a significant blow to the Russian
it would cut off
aspirations
the
of winning in
supply
Ukraine.
line, right?
This would force Russian forces on the left bank of the Dnipro to retreat to Crimea and cause critical difficulties for the supply of the Russian army south and west of Melitopol. Having said that, one should bear in mind that it will be far from easy. The Russians have erected fortifications manned by a significant number of troops in the occupied Zaporizhia Oblast, which has numerous irrigation canals, making offensive operations more complicated. On the North Luhansk front, Russia has managed to stop the Ukrainian
Slugfest.
offensive short of the P-66 highway. Ukraine will continue putting pressure on this front to reach another crucial logistical hub in Starobilsk, creating massive supply difficulties for Russians fighting north of Luhansk. But there are risks associated with an offensive on this axis. Russia has deployed numerous units to this front, following the Izium counteroffensive to stabilize the front. They also have reserves in the rear. Factors like small
Preparing.
rivers, high-rise buildings, and dense forest
They know
areas in this
something might
region
be coming.
favor the defensive side. Also, even if the Ukrainians succeeded in North Luhansk, they will be vulnerable to counterattacks from the territory of the Russian Federation. But similar risks were associated with the Izium counteroffensive, as the liberation of the northeast of the country and reaching the internationally recognized border with Russia could make Ukrainian units closest to the borders susceptible to Russian counterattacks,
Ooh,
which
okay,
has
I
not
didn't think
happened
of
that
that.
much. One of the Russian military bloggers and a former member of the separatist force in Donbass, known for criticizing Putin's conduct of the war, has speculated that a counteroffensive on the left bank of the Dnipro would be the most advantageous axis of advance for the Ukrainian army. Crossing the Dnipro and establishing a sustainable bridgehead on the left bank is the most considerable difficulty associated with this offensive. Since
So
bridges
how do they
connecting
plan
the
to do it?
liberated and occupied areas of the Kherson Oblast were mostly destroyed during the Ukrainian counteroffensive, the Ukrainians would have to use pontoon bridges to cross and will be extensively targeted by the Russian artillery. If the Ukrainians manage to create a bridgehead, they would have to advance through a steppe area without much vegetation.
So what are
On
they
the
going
one
to
hand,
do?
this terrain does not give any cover to the attacking side, but on the other hand, it is much more advantageous for armored maneuvers. Furthermore, the area between the Dnipro and the Crimean Isthmus does not have many settlements, which makes it difficult for a defending side to establish strongholds. The distance between a potential bridgehead and Crimea is
Sure,
relatively
we covered
short,
this information
and if
in
the
another
Ukrainians
video.
achieve any surprise
On the
like they did in
Ukrainian
the Izium
counteroffensive when the
counteroffensive,
Russians were
their
running away,
breakthrough
right?
may bring them to Crimea relatively fast. Liberation of Crimea would be a massive blow to Russian morale, preventing them from using Crimea as the base for their aircraft and the Black Sea Fleet. This scenario is hypothetical and is associated with significant difficulties, such as
hypothetical.
creating a functioning bridgehead
Yeah.
and ensuring an element of surprise. But the Ukrainian command has shown its ability to do that in the Izium counteroffensive, conducted when everyone was expecting a breakthrough in Kherson. What about Russia? Since December, the Ukrainian military and political leadership have been discussing an imminent Russian offensive, which may start between January and March.
Okay.
Russia is currently successfully attacking in Donbass. Capturing Bakhmut would allow them to continue their offensive on Slovyansk and Kramatorsk, along with putting pressure on the Ukrainians in Crimea. Russia is also reportedly gathering troops for a counteroffensive in Crimea. Putin may also order another offensive on Kharkiv, due to its proximity to the Russian border and
Yeah.
Belgorod, one of the staging points of the Russian army, which is advantageous due to its well-documented problems concerning logistics. For now, an attack on Kyiv does not seem likely. Thus, it is possible to argue that Russia will focus on advancing to the administrative borders of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, to sell the capture of Donbass as a victory to the Russian public.
That is all
Putin has already
can
ordered
do.
to increase the number of Russian military personnel to 1.5 million people. A report from Finnish military intelligence claimed that only 25% of Russian soldiers stationed on the border with Finland before the war are currently there, showing that Russia is concentrating its forces on defeating Ukraine at the expense of defending its own borders.
He knows it's not going to get
The Russian
invaded,
airborne
I think.
troops, VDV,
Because that
its
would
naval
make
infantry
everyone
and Wagner
else look
units seem to be the most capable and
like
best
an
equipped
aggressor.
ground troops of the Russian army. Unfortunately for the Russians, the VDV has lost upwards of 50% of its strength since the beginning of the Battle of Kiev, while the naval infantry suffered heavy losses around Volodar, and Wagner lost considerable numbers around Bakhmut. Replacing these losses would be difficult. At the same time, Wagner's chief, Prigozhin, continues conflicting with the Russian establishment on various topics, including minor issues such as whether soldiers should be clean-shaven, which obviously brought Kadyrov into the conversation. But Ukraine has been experiencing internal issues too. On January 18th, the Minister of Internal Affairs, Denis Monastersky, and several other officials died in a helicopter crash, which was likely accidental. In a separate episode, Zelensky fired several ministers and heads of regional administrations, along with banning government officials from traveling abroad for personal reasons. He also signed a law, earlier adopted by the Ukrainian parliament, increasing criminal liability for military insubordination, which was supported by the Ukrainian commander-in-chief Zaluzhny, but was not universally accepted by the Ukrainian public.
That last one, not so much, but those first three are sus. Sus! That needs to be spoken about more. Let me know what you guys think of those 3 points there. The helicopter crash, I think I remember the firing of several ministers. I think a few of those were corrupt, and that was part of the clause for them to get involved in the EU, was to get rid of corruption, and he made an investigation into his own parliament. But the ban from travelling abroad for personal reasons as well, that sounds sus. So the first one and the third one seem sus to me.
The longer the war goes, the more internal problems both countries will probably face.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The success of their offensives depends significantly on internal political stability, even more so.
Do you know what I mean? If you go throughout history, you can see the amount of situations a country has to deal with at home when civil unrest happens whilst they are at war, and it can change the whole government system or the whole scenario, and could even change the war, and both of the countries are going to have to deal with that. Even Zelensky, you know, Putin's dealt with it for a while, so maybe he'll be able to do it. Maybe he'll be able to navigate himself around it easier, whereas Zelensky is going to be a bit risky. But I don't think Putin has his cabinet anymore. I don't think so. I think people are going to start falling out of a lot more windows.
In the case of Ukraine, since this is the only country in this conflict which actually faces an existential threat. The 11th month of the war in Ukraine has not brought us any closer to its resolution.
And we won't
Casualties
get to it
have
for
been
a
mounting
while,
for both sides.
especially
A Ukrainian
now.
official speaking to Reuters said almost 9,000 civilians had been killed in Ukraine since February 2022. The chief of the Norwegian army, Eirik Kristoffersen, suggests an even gloomier number of 30,000. He has also claimed that Russia has lost 180,000 men dead and wounded, while the number for Ukraine is closer to 100,000. According to the Oryx blog,
that's
the
difficult
visually
to say.
confirmed equipment losses for Russia as of February 1st are 1,663 tanks, 3,540 vehicles, 225 command posts and communication stations, 580 artillery pieces and vehicles, 170 multiple rocket launchers, 69 aircraft, 75 helicopters, and 171 drones. For Ukraine, these are 453 tanks, 1,299 vehicles, 8 command posts and communication stations, 227 artillery pieces and vehicles, 37 multiple rocket launchers, 57 aircraft, 29 helicopters, and 69 drones. Our series will continue in the coming weeks, so make sure you have subscribed and press the bell button.
And I hope you guys are subscribed to their channel and have got their bell icon hit. If you haven't, head over to their page. That link's in the description box down below. If you have, check out some of their new videos. That link's in the description box down below. If you enjoyed my reaction, you're looking forward to my binge of this, about 5 or 6 episodes, maybe even more, you know what you need to do. You need to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I'm gonna catch you in the next episode.